I'd now like to introduce today's panelist. Eric Simonson, Managing Partner at Everest Group, ensures that the firm's portfolio of research capabilities comprehensively addresses the entire global services space across geographies, services, and sourcing models. Rohitashwa Argowal, Practice Director, manages various research and advisory engagements and other key initiatives with shared services centers. He also leads the organization's research membership focused on global business services. And Shirley Hung, Vice President, advises senior stakeholders of global services, including enterprises, service providers, and investors in their strategic mandates and initiatives. Her responsibilities include leading Everest Group's research in the area of finance and accounting, outsourcing, procurement outsourcing, and customer experience management services. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Eric. Take it away, Eric. Eric, are you muted?
Great, thank you, and happy to be here on today's important webinar. We will start with kind of defining what do we mean from work from home on slide 3, please. So I think many of us at one level instinctively have a view of what is work from home, but we wanted to clarify quickly before we jump into the topic. So basically, it's working from a remote location and not being required at the base office on a regular basis. There's a spectrum of options here, and we'll cover this some later. But this is not the occasional leave the office early or work from the road in a hotel. Some of these key attributes is it can be applicable for both employees and contractors. The comp models, benefits, et cetera, are sort of identical. It's not sort of an alternative way to employ people. There has to be a appropriate technology infrastructure to go with it. And then the employees can also operate from the office when needed. In some cases, that's quite rare. In other cases, it may be a bit more common, and we'll go into some of those scenarios. And then finally, there's not really a change in terms of performance and career development. It's the same expectations. It's not a slow track or a kind of quarantine of somebody who wants to have a limited role. The thing that makes all this very different than if we'd had this conversation 4 months ago is organizations are now thinking about doing this at scale. This is not sort of the one team member who may work remotely because they've moved somewhere or they just can't make it to the office. This is the possibility of many people integrating this regularly into their portfolio of how they work. Hence why we focused today's topic on what this looks like to do it both at scale and to make that sustainable. We'll cover three main segments today in the presentation. We'll start by going through a set of convictions that we have. These are things that we believe have proven out to be true and are pretty clear. We think you'll share many of those beliefs with us. We may be providing some data and analysis that will be helpful to you as you try to orient your own organizations. We'll then go into a set of 3 provocations. These are some things where we think there may be tricks that people are missing or not yet thinking about, and we want to stretch the thinking a bit to encourage people to fully get themselves around how this model will play out. And then finally, we'll spend a slide on some controversies, some things that we don't have answers to. They're lurking in the background or likely to emerge, and will be important for us to all sort out in the coming months and quarters as this new model comes further into play. Along the way, we'll do some polls. There'll be 2 different polls. We'll also talk about some ways to engage around this topic outside of the webinar, including a more detailed survey that we're doing. We'll also talk about a working group that we're looking to establish if people are interested in potentially joining that. So with that, we'll now jump in. We'll actually go to our first poll. And just to get everybody warmed up, you should see the poll on the right-hand side. the question is, what portion of your organization's workforce do you expect to be in a work from home model with sort of a post-COVID mindset? So assume that the social distancing and all that has largely the need for that subsided. And again, this can be solely work from home, or it can be predominantly work from home. This isn't about leaving early on a Friday to have furniture delivered. Okay, so give another 10 seconds for people to click, and then we'll start to close the poll and look at the results. All right, here we go. So interestingly, we have, starting at the bottom, we have over 10% of people thinking that more than 75% of the workforce will be working from home. Almost 20% thinking it's going to be the majority, but less than 75%. The largest, over half, is basically the 20 to 50%, and then only 15% think it's going to be less than 20. So we have almost equal amounts of people thinking it'll be over 75 as think it'll be less than 20% of the workforce. When I was preparing for this, I actually tried to guess and was assuming that the middle bucket, 21 to 50, would be the largest. Indeed, that it is. Where I got it wrong is I thought we'd have more people thinking the 6 to 20% than the 51 to 75. I had only 10% being more than 50%, but I was under optimistic compared to others. I want to call out that there's a in the chat panel, we'll show a link to the survey that we're starting on how to do work from home planning. We'll also mention this, provide the link again several more times during the webinar and in the document near the end. If it's something you'd like to contribute to and then receive a copy of the results, please feel free to participate in that or mark the link to do this later. It's about a 10-minute survey, so it won't take too much time, but definitely more than the single poll question we just did. Okay. All right, on to slide 6, please. So I mentioned that we'd start with 5 convictions. We'll now jump into those. These span a range of topics on work from home, from both the need of it all the way through the technology and real estate implications. We'll go through these, and Rohit and Shirley will be taking turns on some of these along with myself. As we're doing this, if you would like to ask questions for us to cover at the end, you can use the Q&A panel. Some of them we may try to cover during the flow of the webinar, but we'll also allocate about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to take as many questions as we can. So feel free to start contributing those. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rohit on page 7.
Thanks, Eric. I don't think our first conviction will surprise anyone here today, but what everybody has agreed to is that COVID-19 has fundamentally altered the outlook towards work from home. Before COVID-19 happened, work from home was not considered as a sustainable or efficient delivery model by most organizations. Very few were actually investing in ecosystem to scale work from home. When this happened and the world went into a lockdown almost overnight, everybody was seriously concerned about service continuity. And the success, or the reasonable success, of prolonged work from home over the last 3 to 4 months has actually been a surprise. Let's move on to the next slide and look at some data. What we have captured in the table here are work from home adoption trends for enterprises and GBS globally, before and after the COVID. We have also, on the basis of our interactions with extensively in the market and our multiple quick polls over the last few months, we have estimated how do we expect this to scale in the next in the next 1 to 2 years as well. Please note that the percentages we are referring to here are FTE equivalent. So this is the population that, or workforce that works from home at a given point in time. And actually, you could have more people with option to work from home. Let's look at the trends, right? Before COVID, majority of the companies, almost 2/3, were in the first bucket where they had 5% or less workforce having a permanent or long-term work from home option. This was mainly used as an exception, a means to enhance BCP. Very few companies actually trained their employees on prolonged work from home. And there were a few who were in the second category, 5 to 20% people working from home. This was relatively selective adoption. Uh, Even here, most of the teams were working on work from home on occasional basis, attending office maybe 2 to 3 days a week mostly. And then there were some companies who were strategically adopting it, who had scaled work from home to about 22% range and almost negligible. And we're talking about the larger enterprises, but almost negligible companies that had more than 50% workforce in the work from home model. Now, as we know, this changed dramatically during the COVID. Uh, Many companies started testing their work from home readiness around end of February, early March, or some even started a few weeks earlier. And by end of March and early April, we had majority of the employees working from home. It did not happen without fair share of challenges, but companies that were previously, before COVID, in second and third categories, found it relatively easy to make the change. Then there were some companies who started fairly early and started to figure out, how do we arrange for devices, how do we solve for security protocols, governance, permissions. They faced less challenges as compared to others. Don't get me wrong, this was still a Herculean task to manage and sustain. There are a few examples of companies who could not really achieve that. As you can see from there are still some companies in the middle two categories, even during lockdown. As of today, we see a lot of companies starting to return to office, having skeletal staff of about 5, 15, 20%, anywhere between that range, and then planning to scale it in phased manner. But as we look ahead, what we are seeing is that most companies are trying to find out what is the ideal scale for them to have workforce work from home. Nobody is asking if they should do it. The question is how much. Our estimates, and then very interestingly, this aligns with the quick poll we just had. Most of the companies will be in the 20 to 50% adoption range. Some are even expected to be more bullish, but then again, there will be others who will be in the first two categories. As we move on, we'll talk more about why we think this is there, what are the associated challenges, what companies need to solve for. There are many examples of companies that have taken a bullish posture towards this. The global technology companies, Google, Facebook, many other IT services companies, TCS, Infosys, have been vocal about scaling work from home. Again, the scale varies between 1/3 to 3/4, but being bullish about this. Before we get into some of the practical aspects, let's talk a bit about why we think companies are going to scale this, and then there are many reasons. But let me move on and talk about our conviction number 2, which says that if you do it right, work from home can offer significant cost savings. We definitely believe that this is a great opportunity to take out costs, and that being one of the top priorities for organizations because of impending recession and budget cliffs. Of course, some industries and some companies have been impacted more than others, but definitely work from home could be a near-term opportunity to take out costs. But how much savings are we actually talking about? Let's move on to slide 10, please. What we have done is we have assessed the potential impact of scaled work from home adoption on operating costs for GBS. Note that we took the base case for what is presented here is for IT services GBS based in India, but we have done assessments for some other services mix and other locations, and the broad trends will apply. This assessment shows that companies can save up to 15% of operating costs by scaling work from home. Those are some big savings that we're talking about, and it kind of gets exciting. But note that these are purely operational savings. So what do you save in a steady state in an ongoing manner? And we are not calculating the impact of capital expenses. that companies need to incur to enable work from home. Also, there could be potential long-term savings on in terms of your capex as you scale work from home. Let's take a closer look at what exactly are where exactly are these savings coming from. Let's move to page number 11. What we have done here in this chart is we have the breakdown of cost savings across different cost categories. We have taken an aggressive scenario. Like you saw on the previous page, the actual scale of adoption of work from home impacts the savings. Now, as you start scaling work from home, and then you have more than 50% people working from home, you can move from 100 to about 85, 87. These are indexed costs. And the savings are coming from three key categories: people cost savings, real estate, and some other factors. On the technology side, you may actually end up incurring more costs in the short term, last mile connectivity, relatively lower utilization for your infra and your accessories and other devices, because now you need to solve for each employee. Net, what we are saying is the overall cost savings of 13 to 15%. Let me break down some of the key elements one by one. If we start with people cost, right, we are talking about two main levers: attrition costs and productivity savings. In attrition, we are calculating that how much attrition do you prevent by allowing the flexibility to work from home. This saves you cost incurred for backfilling, cost in training new employees, the productivity lag with new employees. And in terms of productivity, we have made very modest assumptions. What we have heard in the short term, there are some very surprising and very promising results. Will the productivity improvements sustain for long term? There are a lot of questions there, and we'll talk a bit more about that. Other than the 4 to 6% people cost savings indicated here, we believe this could actually be more going forward. We expect as companies scale work from home, we'll start seeing an emergence of some satellite locations. So these will be clusters of remote teams in, let's say, tier 2, tier 3 cities in the countries where they have presence, and in adjoining countries where they don't even have presence, but they have a cluster of remote workers. So without any physical presence, they can hire people in those locations. And this could, in the long term, result in direct compensation cost savings as well, because they're hiring at even lower costs. But that's not been factored in here, so that's an additional cost. On the real estate, while our assumptions show that you can save about 7 to 9%, there are really a few factors that you'll need to deal with. We'll talk a bit more about that. And then in the other savings, what we're talking about is how do you save transportation costs, you save consumables, and few other cost elements. Let me move on to page number 12, and we also make sure that we are not saying that this is going to be easy fruits to capture. There are going to be fair share of challenges, and there are a lot of variables that organizations need to deal with. We have bucketed them under 4 key categories related to real estate, technology, talent, and type of work. Real estate being a big one because that's the biggest cost driver. What we have here is that depending on the nature of facility and the kind of lease agreement you have, it could significantly impact your actual savings despite your decision to scale work from home. TCS has made a public statement that during this lockdown, despite of the employees working from home, they could not really save because of the nature of the lease agreements, and many companies did not. But how does this translate into long-term savings is one big factor, because many of these companies have long-term lockdowns, long-term locks on these agreements. In terms of technology, how mature your, how modernized your technology platforms are, how much cloud migration have you achieved already, current extent of adoption of digital platforms. In terms of talent, we're talking about the extent of collaboration needed, what's the overall maturity of your workforce. In terms of the work itself, right? What's the degree of automation? What's the degree of process standardization? All of these collectively will determine the extent of savings that companies can achieve. So it's got to be a little tricky balance to achieve the best case scenario. Shirley, would you like to talk about the next two convictions?
Yes, sorry. I was on mute. So Rohit, what I think is also important to note is that the cost saving potential will be dependent on the degree to which your organization is planning to leverage the work from home model. And while cost savings can be a really important component of the business case for work from home, as Rohit has just explained, the degree to which costs can be saved when moving to a work from home model is dependent upon many factors. It's also dependent on the model that you choose to adopt, which we will discuss in our next conviction. Our third conviction is that to build a successful work from home strategy, you must gain alignment on the business objectives that you're trying to achieve. A cost may be one consideration to this, but it won't be the only one. So there are many objectives that GBS organizations may want to achieve by adopting work from home, and these can include improving the GBS value proposition and productivity, contrary to initial concerns over potential drops in productivity due to transitioning to work from home. We have heard from many organizations that they have actually experienced improved performance metrics during this COVID-19 threat. So work from home also provides the flexibility that new generations of workforce are seeking. This means better access to new talent markets and increased employee satisfaction and engagement. Of course, we can't talk about work from home benefits without mentioning the important role it plays in business continuity planning. Given what has transpired the past few months, organizations now understand the need to build in work from home contingencies into their BCP strategy. Furthermore, there are other societal and environmental benefits that can be achieved, such as reduced emissions from commuting and tapping into traditionally disadvantaged communities to source for talent, otherwise known as impact sourcing, if some of you are familiar with that term. No matter what your objectives may be, it is important to be clear about what they are, since it informs on the work from home model that you should adopt. And as we see in the bottom of the slide, there are 5 primary models ranging from no work from home on the left, so this is an expectation to be full-time work from the office, to having a completely virtual team on the right. And in between, there are models where work from home is on an exception basis, on a rotation basis, or on a primary basis, but with an option to still operate from an office occasionally. If, for example, a key objective for your work from home strategy is to tap into new talent markets substantially by leveraging impact sourcing, then any work from home model that is not completely virtual may not make sense, since it would, the other models require some routine access to an office. If the primary objective is to address BCP concerns, then there may not be a need to move towards the right end of the spectrum, since having some level of work from home may be sufficient enough of a foundation from which to transition to full work from home quickly if the need arises. So indeed, maybe the organizations may not need work from home at all during normal operations and can just invest in the infrastructure and technologies that can be mobilized when BCPs are activated. So what are the technologies that are important for scaling work from home in your organization? We'll talk about that in our next conviction. I think we can all agree that it would have been hard to imagine large-scale work from home being as successful as it has been recently if we faced this global pandemic threat 10 or even 5 years ago. This is because of the availability of technology that is now in place to enable remote working. Commonly discussed technologies that are needed to support work from home mainly involve communication platforms such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams, knowledge sharing tools such as OneDrive and Dropbox, and document creation software like G Suite and Keynote. The icons that we've noted on this slide are examples of technologies that enable online collaboration and are by no means exhaustive. However, there are also an increasing array of tools that will be needed in a scaled work from home model. Organizations will need to be able to recruit, onboard, manage, and develop their workforce remotely. Fortunately, there are many technologies available that can assist in this effort. For example, HireVue is an online video interviewing software and pre-employment assessments platform. It helped Vodafone decrease time to fill from 23 days to 11 days, which is a 52% decrease in cycle time. There are also tools to support frontline managers in tracking and monitoring the productivity of their teams remotely. Also of great importance in adopting work from home is ensuring data access and security. Companies are investing in technologies such as desktop control, such that individuals cannot download, capture, screenshots, or print sensitive data. Other data security measures include biometric-based authentication, on-screen data masking, employee behavioral analytics, and encrypted communications.
Great, thanks, Shirley. We're on now to the fifth conviction around real estate, and I think it's reasonably clear that both the change in the working model is likely to have fairly big implications. Most of us have assumed that this will result in a net decrease in space required. It has been interesting to interact with some organizations that actually see the opposite and are planning for some increase in space because of largely social distancing, more team building, et cetera, and thinking that they may actually need more space in aggregate. So it'll be a bit unique by organization. The work environment's also going to change quite a bit. So let's talk about the intent and approach here. Before COVID, real estate was largely moving in a direction of more common areas, facilitating agile work, design thinking, building culture. As we go through this, in some ways, we're going to be looking to have the opportunity for forms of intimacy, but also scaling the remote workers and providing social distancing requirements as well, at least in the immediate term. We see 6 basic aspects of real estate that organizations need to be evaluating to figure out exactly the implications. The first is just overall from the capacity and the site-specific needs. How do they want to shape those? Will headquarters look the same? Will there be new forms of satellites, the hubs and spokes, the nature of their roles change, et cetera? We also expect to see new models for how to actually acquire real estate, maybe more flexible arrangements, more WeWorky in certain ways, and how that may complement into other things. As you actually get into the office itself, the floor layout is going to be changing, the seat allocation as well. This is where a lot of the hoteling, kind of Internet of Things, digitization of the work will become important. And then finally, some offices may need to be modernized. Could have been that they were time for a refresh anyway, which may impact some of the other factors. And then there will also be local regulatory or safety norms that have to be considered. Not all places are going to sort out the answer in the same way, and the answer is also likely to change here in the coming years as best practices emerge. Rohit, I know you've been doing quite a few briefings since we released the overall work from home playbook a week or two ago. anything that's coming out from your conversations with others on how they're starting to think about real estate?
Yeah, Eric, and I think the biggest factor is that this is the burning question, and everybody's trying to figure out how much of real estate can they let go. I think the point you mentioned earlier on near-term social distancing implications, meaning that organizations require more space, than usual, versus how much real estate can they let go of if they have employees working from home. That's the critical balance organizations are trying to find. We have some analysis on that as we get into the provocations, so we'll talk a bit more about that.
Okay. Great, thank you. So before we get into provocations, want to do our second poll, and basically it's as you've thought about the long-term scaled work from home, what are the things that are starting to come to mind as the single biggest challenge? I think almost all of these are going to be a challenge, but what's the thing that you expect to actually be drive the majority of the thought process and the problem solving? All the way from basically, is there executive support for it? Does that push it too far or too little? The talent and productivity, so the human side, the data security and compliance, which has often been diminished in recent times just to survive. The change management or the culture, how does it actually really sustain itself and the impact on the individuals? And then finally, things like the government incentives or constraints on how they're playing into working norms. All right, so I think we'll close the poll and look at the results here. Here it comes. Okay. So basically, the first and last had the least constraint, with the biggest being the change management and org culture. I think that it followed closely behind by the data security and compliance. I think those are pretty consistent with what we're in aggregate hearing. A lot of these have to be sorted through, but the middle three are the ones that are going to be generally viewed as the biggest drivers of what's actually going to happen. Okay, so on to our first provocation. We see that operationalizing work from home and long term is not going to be easy. And very succinctly, getting into this is going to be a lot easier than getting out of it. The shift into the model due to the rapid spread of COVID forced a lot of things to happen fairly quickly without a lot of deep thought, understandably so. Coming out of it, it's going to be the exact opposite. So let's talk a little bit about that. On slide 22, we show some results from organizations we surveyed last month about what are their biggest concerns on work from home, in recent times. And you'll notice if you look at sort of the first four rows and the significant effort, all of them that are above 30%, starting with the manager training and effectiveness and remote, the real estate changes and reduction, the remote cultural building, and then the changing talent practices. How do you hire? How do you onboard, develop, et cetera? These are all, to some extent, other than real estate, a lot of the soft factors. Not only are they somewhat hard to anticipate in some ways, they're also very dependent upon the differences in individuals, subgroups, et cetera. They're a lot of the very subtle nature of how organizations behave and how it sort of feels to work there. And all of these things are have been disrupted, and as we continue down the path of how to sort this out, will drive a lot of the thinking. I think one of the interesting things that we'd seen both when we'd covered work from home before COVID and then coming up in more pronounced ways is, although work from home may sound like a great thing for most people, that's not actually true. There are employees where it leads to dissatisfaction over time, whether that be loneliness, lack of connectivity, networks breaking down, et cetera. And so there's probably a swinging pendulum here, and we're at the extreme on one end right now, but we'll probably head back towards the other end, or at least towards the middle in the coming quarters. Slide 23. So the key thought that we want to leave people with is, in many ways, work from home is something that challenges the organization. And as you're sorting through it, if you can, as much as possible, be trying to take a mindset of how to integrate it into the fabric in a way that actually strengthens all these things. So not just understanding the implications, but how would you proactively use it to create benefit? That we believe is one of the true norths of trying to get to a really sustainable model that ends up making sense for everyone in the long term. So a little bit more specifically, how do GBS organizations actually need to think about this? We believe it needs to be a holistic thought process. We've got 4 factors on the left that have added complexity due to all this. The first is there's generally an increased expectation of work from home is going to be a bigger thing. That's both the employees and a lot of the leadership. We've got the data security and business continuity challenges that in some ways helps on BCP, but challenges data security in a fairly fundamental sense. We've got the cultural factors and the challenges of somebody feeling isolated. And then finally, we have seen and we expect to continue to see interesting ways that the talent market, the supply and demand for individuals is actually impacted as these changes ripple through the system. So to work through these, we believe it's important to think about talent along 3 major dimensions. One, what's the workforce strategy? The supply and demand, how do you source it, locations. Locations becomes very interesting in work from home and to what extent you actually specify that, and how that intersects with different skills. The entire people strategy of how you find people, bring them in, scale them up, position them and retain them also gets challenged. And then the work optimization levers in terms of how do you actually make the work amenable to the situation and drive other benefits also becomes important. So technology, RPA, AI can play a role in a lot of this. Analytics start to become important, understanding what time is being spent, identifying best practices, maybe looking at how networks of people and how they're interacting is changing. And then finally getting the right mix of looking at productivity and continuous improvement. So a lot of things that are pretty directly impacted by such a fundamental change, and we think kind of taking a system view will be important. Shirley, what would you encourage people to think about that from your experience in GBS organizations that they may miss?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway for me is that there is a real difference to working from home when everyone else is working from home, compared to working from home on a permanent basis when your colleagues or your clients or your suppliers may be back in the office. So the positive performance results that we've seen during this recent COVID-19 crisis may not actually be sustainable in a mixed system with mixed expectations. So it is important to consider the holistic talent strategy framework when GBS is developing its work from home strategy.
Surely building on to what you said, let's move on to our next provocation. It's not the same working from home when everybody's doing it versus when people resume office regularly. And our second provocation is that work from home is not for all work types, and it's not for all employees. One tends to think that this is a direct contradiction to what COVID has proven, because everybody went into the work from home mode and it worked pretty well. But I think the points you are making are very important, that the performance that we saw during this crisis was under exceptional circumstances. And when life gets back to normal, it might not sustain. So let's move on to the next page and look at what are our, how are we approaching the important question of what work types are more suited for long-term work from home versus others. Uh, Before I explain what this framework is, I want to make up another point is that during the COVID crisis, and then it continues even now, we witnessed everybody, be your clients, managers, regulators, vendors, everybody, kind of extending a lot of flexibility. Everybody was being very accommodative, and that enabled organizations to adopt or kind of, do work from home successfully. People didn't have a choice. However, our preferences and comfort levels change very quickly. And we believe that post-COVID, a lot of those restrictions that prevented you to work from home before might again come back. To what extent, we will see. There are a lot of unknowns. So this framework that we are showing here is to help organizations identify what work types are better suited for certain type of work to be delivered from home. It's a combination of two key dimensions. On the x-axis, we'll look at what's the feasibility of remote delivery, what's the ease of remote delivery. It combines various factors such as what's the degree of collaboration needed, what's the extent of process standardization, how automated your processes are, to what extent do you need technology infrastructure? Do you need a seamless power supply? Do you need access to heavy data? Are you connected into local data centers? The last parameter is actually qualitative. It's the comfort level for GBS and parent organizations, because we see that being a factor that kind of led to variations in how different companies reacted. So the answer is that the answer may not be same for all. It could be different. Similarly, on y-axis, what you are looking at is the acceptance of risk associated with work from home delivery. What it essentially means is that there will always be some risk associated with remote working, but how open are you, or how much are you ready to deal with that? The risk could be simple data information security. It could be related to the delivery location, specific risk and control requirements. It could be related to your home location, regulations or other controls, some B2B contracts you may have, personally identified information, protection, etc. What we did is that we actually, on the next page, will show some snapshots, but we kind of assessed various IT and business process services, different work types, and then plotted them. So, for example, within HR, recruitment services will be a dot somewhere on this chart, and then learning and development will be another dot, and each of them will fall into four zones. The top right is zone of acceptance, what's easiest to do, and the opposite is zone of rejection, what's most difficult to do, not that anything is impossible. And then there are two other areas, reluctant acceptance, which you can deal with, resistance, where there is very high risk. Essentially, this helps you determine which areas will take more effort to enable in the work from home model versus what you can do relatively easily. Let's move on to the next page, because this is not all. There are a few more, factors that you should consider. If you look at the funnel on the left side on your left side, what you'll see is that step one was identifying what are the suitable work types. But then you need to see which of your employees are more capable of working from home in the long term. Again, all your employees did that during COVID. But in the long term, when there will be potentially working alone or, long-term isolation from teams, when other teams are kind of working together, how do they really, adapt to that? Do they have ability to self-monitor? Do they have ability to communicate effectively? You can't expect your frontline managers to invest as much as they're doing right now. You have to be more programmatic about it. Also, 2 years down the line, when 30 to 50% of your organization could be new, there'll be new people. How do you train them or how do you hire people who are better suited for work from home model? This will apply more for people who predominantly or permanently work from home, not so much for people who are working from home 2 to 3 days a week. And then there is step three, which is very important, is that how do you consider employee choices? We have been working with enterprises even before COVID on their what we call work at home agent, WAHA, or work from home models. And we have seen that unless the employees are motivated, there can be some unintended consequences. loss of productivity, leading to attrition, other challenges. So it's important to consider employee choices as well. We have built toolkits that help you assess what work types are suitable, which model do you place them in, and implications on real estate. So how does it all add up? According to our calculations, we believe GBS can move about 60 to 70% workforce into work from home model. Now they could be completely or partially working from home, and effectively this may end up freeing up to 30 to 40% of their real estate requirements. Shari, over to you.
Great. So our final provocation is that a sustained and scaled work from home model requires different talent practices than what we have been used to. I think a lot of the questions that have been coming in from you in the audience is related to this. So employees on a primarily work from home model will have different expectations in terms of their career development and fulfillment of their personal and professional goals. Working remotely may also impact the organization culture and the individual social capital within that organization. So these are attributes that are commonly built through informal conversations, which is really hard to recreate in a work from home setting. And so therefore it requires more conscious and deliberate effort from everyone's part. Frontline managers that are accustomed to supervising their teams based on physical proximity will need to adjust to new modes of working, and leadership development initiatives will also need to be rethought. So in many organizations, they rely on individuals learning leadership behaviors through observation. But again, this is difficult to replicate when visibility for an individual is constrained to just what they experience in their own remote setting. And lastly, and probably most importantly, the employee's mental and well-being and achieving a healthy work-life balance is also a big concern when individuals may not have prior experience on how to work on a physically isolated basis. So as to wrap up, as a research firm, we have a nice acronym for you to consider as you work to adapt talent to a work from home model. Our SPEED framework provides 5 key focus areas. S is for strengthening ethics and sustaining cultural alignment. P is for productivity monitoring by adopting an outcome-driven model. E is for finding ways to engage and motivate your employees. And the second E is for evolving talent models, including organizational structure and policies for efficient communication and decision making. And finally, the D is for digital platform enablement by investing in the tools, technologies, and equipment necessary to maintain and improve performance levels.
I think what's also interesting, Shirley, is that while the framework applies broadly, it will have its own customized versions for different employee levels. For example, what you need to train your frontline managers on will be very different because that's a different beast they'll tackle. So, everybody need to be mindful that there'll be versions of practices that you will have for different employee levels and for different teams based on their nature of interaction and work types.
Thanks, Rohit. So the last slide here is that there are still several outstanding questions that will be impacting the adoption of scalable work from home in GBS. It is unclear how expectations will change regarding defining, measuring, and managing productivity. The legal and regulatory environment can also be a barrier to, or an opposite, an accelerator of work from home. And this could be different by jurisdiction.
I think it's also interesting to see controversies 3 and 4 because we've been getting a lot of questions on employee preferences, employee choices. So how will changing workforce preferences, because in the short term, employees seem to be very excited about this prospect on a permanent basis, but this may change. So how will employee preferences guide evolution of work from home? The last controversy, again, I find it very interesting, is that it gets really tricky. Where do you stop monitoring employees and kind of, start invading their privacy? For example, some employees may have a dedicated workplace and other could be working from their personal space, like bedrooms. Some may not be comfortable with the constant monitoring via video or keystroke recording. Again, very interesting problem to tackle and then solve for in the next few weeks and months.
Great. Let's go into the kind of wrap up in the Q&A. On slide 32, it mentioned earlier that we'll provide some ways to engage further. The first is, if you're interested in more content, we have a few blogs listed there that you may find interesting. There are also some reports that we've published in different membership programs in recent weeks and months that may be helpful to you. The second option is the work from home planning survey that we mentioned earlier. The link is provided again here. You will receive an email after the webinar, probably within 6 to 12 hours, to the recording and of this document. And so you can download the document and click on the link. We'll also be promoting it in social media. And then finally, if this is an area of passion for you and you're involved in setting work from home strategies, I'd be happy to have any enterprises that would want to see about joining a working group to sort through some of these things together and share best practices. So there's a link there as well if you would like to do that. You can also enter that. You can email us directly or other ways if interested. So with that, let's now go to the Q&A on slide 33. Let's see, Shirley, I'm going to come to you first. You've been covering in the contact center space the work at home agent model, which is closely related to this. It's a little different in some ways, but it's kind of one of the extreme versions. Are there any lessons learned from that segment that you think are worth highlighting for everyone today?
Yeah, there definitely is. So the work at home agent model, otherwise known as WFH, is very well established within the contact center area. We've seen that it's experienced around a 20% annual growth pre-COVID. And that's been mainly driven by the need to access niche and specialist skill sets and provide flexibility in staffing when there's seasonal changes in volumes and demand. But because of COVID, we're expecting that the growth of WFH will actually exceed 30% going forward due to the risks that have been exposed recently. So those organizations that have an established platform for WFH were able to scale to a full work from home model much more quickly than others who didn't have it. And there are a lot of technologies and talent management approaches that contact centers have leveraged, which I think can apply outside of the contact center. For example, data security measures, employee engagement methods, and remote hiring and development tools. We actually released a research report back in January before all of this crisis happened on how to orchestrate a successful WFH-based delivery model. So if you're interested in the details on that, you can access the report on our portal.
Great, thanks, Shirley. Next question is kind of for all of us. Shirley just hinted at it, but we also had several questions around how does this work for types of work or sectors where privacy and data security is a big concern. Anything the two of you can share on how you've been seeing organizations approach that, any sort of breakthrough approaches that may not be commonly appreciated at this point?
I guess I can kind of start off. We've seen there being approaches such as, using biometrics to authenticate access, seeing, kind of video monitoring. And I think that goes to one of the controversies that Rohit talked about, which is the invasion of privacy. Certainly access kind of desktop control to limit downloads and things like that. There's an increasing focus and investment in data security areas. And to the degree, I think one of the questions that we've seen is there's actually more openness by organizations to consider work from home, even in very heavily regulated kind of industries such as healthcare and financial services. And that is only made possible through the leverage of these data security type of methods and tools. To what degree that's going to manifest, it's still a bit uncertain. And actually, the survey that you talked about, Eric, should hopefully give us some indication of how organizations are thinking about this as well.
Yeah, Shirley, you mentioned the video monitoring. That was, as we were preparing for the webinar, one of the things we spoke about, I think, is a great illustration of some of the points we made on slide 27 on the process of breaking the work apart to find which types may fit in which models, down to who may be qualified and who may be interested. So some people that may not bother them for certain career paths, certain types of work, others it would. And there's going to be, it's not just what's possible, it's going to, the employees and the talent markets are going to have a say. And it'll have, I think, a lot of, I think we'll find the talent markets will change a lot in the next, I'll call it 5 years, as people figure out how important work from home is to them and organizations figure out, what models make sense for them to accommodate. Rohit, anything you've seen on the privacy side of data security side, any innovations?
I just said one point. I think Shirley covered most of the points, but yeah, organizations are really exploring different ways. For example, one of the large retail companies, they actually had their in-house team built entirely new security system, which allows them to have contact center agents working from home in a scaled model. And this is not just happening in US, but also in other parts of the world, including India, Africa, other parts of Asia. So yeah, it's a technology challenge, and organizations are right now exploring many possibilities. And when we'll see more solutions emerge as we move on in the next couple of years.
Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to move to wrap up. I think people have hopefully taken away from both the content and the questions. Work from home on its surface in early March seemed, hey, this is really about bandwidth and having access to computers and a good collaboration platform. I think everybody's come to appreciate it's much more complicated than that, and hence the points we've been trying to make about how to sort through it in an integrated way, breaking it apart by types of work and different strategies, et cetera. So there's a lot to figure out. It's a freedom in some ways, but it's a lot of complexity in other ways, and suspect we'll be continuing to talk about this quite a bit. On the last slide 34, we do have a COVID resource center. If you would like to access that, it tracks a range of things happening in service delivery organizations, plus some content that'll be available in the webinar document as well. So thanks everyone for your time today. I hope you found it valuable and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
And we would like to thank Rohit and Shirley and Eric, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, you'll receive a follow-up email within 1 to 2 business days with a link to download the presentation slides, along with accessing the on-demand playback of today's live session. On behalf of the Everest Group and our presenters, thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.